Okay, hello everybody. Thanks so much for having me here. I am loving this event. I've been super thrilled with being able to sit and absorb what the previous speakers have said. And I've been somewhat inspired to revise my slideshow a little bit. Because I feel like a pirate. And so I thought, let's just take a minute, because pirates are on ships, and we happen to be in a contained space now that's pretty ship-like, so I would suggest get up on your feet and stand for a second and turn to the co-pirate next to you, give them an R, find out who they are. Cool, because we need this. We need that spirit. I really thank Alex for bringing that metaphor to the table, because I think it's appropriate in so many ways, and I think that vision he gave of those pirate crews being both diverse and radical and do-it-yourselfers and so many other positive things, and inclusive, which I think is something really important to all of this. So I really appreciate that metaphor, and I think I'll carry it around with me for good now. So yeah, I'm a designer and builder from Ontario, Canada, and my start in all of this, I promise this isn't a boring life history, but my start in this was I built myself and my family a home 25 years ago. It was a straw bale house. It was the first one in Ontario, Canada. And as other people up here have said, that process was by and large an experience in making every mistake it's possible to make, and then inventing some more mistakes to make because you hadn't made enough in the first place. But far from sort of being put off by those, I was really pretty excited by the possibility I saw in that material, in straw bale. And that really kicked off a career that I've been super fortunate to have. I call myself a sustainable building omnivore. I have no allegiance to any kind of material or any kind of system. My approach has been that there's a wealth of, or a host of criteria that make up any successful building. And I spent some time sort of putting that thought into this book called Making Better Buildings. And this is sort of a list of some of those criteria. It's not all of them, but the different lenses through which somebody who wants to make a building thinks about what makes the building, what would make it a successful building for them. And to me, and again, a nod to Alex's thing this morning, the why is so important in all of this. When somebody comes to me and wants to talk to me about helping them design a building, I flip into this mode that some clients have called the annoying 3-year-old mode, which is somebody comes to me and they say, Chris, I want to build a straw bale house, and my go-to reaction is, why? And then they'll tell me some things, and then that's not good enough, and I'll say why again. And I just keep whying and whying and whying until I feel like, okay, now you've told me why. Like, you might say, oh, I want a hempcrete house, or I want a straw bale house, and your first answer to why might be, well, I want to do something good for the environment. And my why might, there's, when you scrape down far enough, you kind of get to like where people stand on some of these criteria. And lately I've been, the embodied carbon one is sort of in red there, because I've been pretty obsessed with that, and I'll talk about that a little bit too. But Yeah, I think it's really important, and one of the things that I wanted to bring to the conversation today is the notion that hemp and some of the ways you can build with it might be the ideal answer to your version of the answers to those questions. To that that's the baseline why gets answered with that material, but also it might not. But that doesn't mean there isn't another appropriate natural material or strategy that you can also explore. So I got pretty early in my career. So I started doing straw bale building professionally in 1998. And at the end of 1999, I got a phone call from my neighbor, Grant Moorcroft. He's like a couple kilometers. Everybody okay if I use that word? Down the road from me. And he said, yeah, Chris, I know you've been building them straw bale houses, and I got some straw here I want you to take a look at. See if you want to build with it. So I went down to his farm, and he had just grown one of the first hemp crops in Ontario when it got legalized in, I think, 1998 in Canada. And his path to building with or growing hemp was really interesting. His farm, he was the fifth generation on that land, and the first three generations, growing hemp was actually a big part of what grew on that farm. And then for his grandfather for a little bit, but then his father and himself, a big part of their job on the farm was trying to get rid of the friggin' hemp that kept springing up because it had the seed had gone feral, and he was sort of like fighting this plant for most of his career as a farmer. And then when it became legal, he was like, oh hell, I gotta get into growing something that wants to grow here. So my introduction to hemp as a building material was using basically just straw bales, but using the hemp stalks as the bales. So he's growing like a tall, thin, tight crop. So he was getting like a really long, 8-10 feet tall, but very thin stalk that we could fold up in a regular rectangular baler. And so one of the things that happens if you want to build with kooky things that nobody's built with before is every time you want to do something, you got to figure out if it's going to work. And so we've ended up doing a lot of testing work. So up on the screen there, you can see, when we decided to use hemp bales, we had lots of good test data from other kinds of bales, but these bales were, the material's quite different. So, we had to go through a whole set of tests to make sure that they were good. So that's a compressive test going on in the lab there. And the results of that were they're actually awesome building bales. And so we built a lot of different buildings with them. The photo in the middle there is one of a building that we did where we actually used the big round bales, and those are big round bales of Grant's hemp as load-bearing columns for a building. And we infilled that with the square hemp bales, the rectangular hemp bales. So I put that there just to show you that we do a lot of kooky things. We build some really interesting buildings. And for a long time, the hemp bales were a big part of that. And then, as Grant was sort of wondering what else we could do with some of his stalks, because we certainly weren't using them all, making buildings out of them, that's when, I started hearing rumblings of hempcrete, first in France and then in England, and, caught on to the fact that people were chopping this stuff up and mixing it with lime, and so we started playing around on his farm with equipment he had to see what we could do to chop it up and come up with some binders. And so I started working with hempcrete in about I think 2001, 2002 was the first time it started going into buildings, and that little building on the right is the first hempcrete building that we did up in Ontario. So this has also come up today earlier that it's exciting that hemp is starting to be legal here in the U.S. because it's been legal in Canada for a long time, and it's kind of gone nowhere because we're a tiny little country with hardly any people and not much ambition to invent and really innovate. And so, it's exciting that gate is opening up here. And so what I kind of wanted to do a bit with this presentation is just sort of think about and share with you like where I think we are right now with hempcrete, and then with other ag materials in general. But I think right now it would be great to do a bit more testing, and there's certainly refinements that could be made and stuff like that. But pretty much we know how to mix hempcrete. We know how to get it in a building. We figured out how to spray it, how to precast it, make blocks out of it. Like there aren't a lot of real technical hurdles left in making this a viable building material. There's lots of R&D in terms of the delivery of those things, how we bring the cost down, and I'm going to touch on some of that kind of stuff. But the basics of got a ground up plant, got some kind of binder, put them together, add some water, we got that. Like that's it's pretty easy stuff. And also really exciting is all the other sort of hemp related building materials that are coming around. It's good to see the bat insulation out there. We've been using that quite a bit lately, and also excited to see things like flooring and siding and sheet goods and stuff coming along. So obviously I don't need to talk to this room about the sort of versatility of that plant. But what I do sort of want to talk about is, so what do we do now? We've got this plant, there are great people up on stage here starting to figure out, how to grow it and how to cut it down and how to chop it up and, how to sell it and all that kind of stuff. But, from the building point of view, I think there's some stuff that we really need to do if we want to see this take off the way that we talk about wanting to see it take off. And basically it's these sort of 4 points that I want to talk about with that. So I think it's really important that we start making sure that we're the facts that we're telling people about this material are true and accurate. And there was one of those things is about the sort of thermal properties of the material. I think there are a lot of wonderful things about hempcrete, and the testing that was showing that shows that the material performs better than the static state R value tests. I think we're seeing the same thing up where we are, but at the same time, if you are going to incorporate this into the building industry, those are the tests that the building industry wants, and I think we have to sort of not say, oh, like really this building is R40 when it's actually R20, but you can show some performance data that shows it performs like an R40 building, but really, a building official needs a static state R value, and we've got to be pretty honest about saying it's 2 per inch or, whatever it happens to be, but there are interesting things that happen with the material in terms of its thermal mass and its hygrothermic properties and stuff like that, but if you're submitting a set of plans to a building department, they want a static state R value, and I think we sort of have to own what that is. And if we want that static state R value to be better, we got to figure out how to make the material have a better R value if we want to get there. And I think also real information about the sort of carbon storage potential of the material. Hempcrete does not magically suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and put it in itself. That's the sort of the biggest sort of misinformation that I'm seeing sort of online now is that somehow this material in particular is magic in that it does that. All plants do that, and it's wonderful that they do that. We have people at really good universities trying to figure out how to make these big machines. Have you ever seen them? There's like fans that are like these monstrous banks of fans, and they're going to suck CO2 out of the atmosphere and like capture it and make interesting things out of it. And that's what plants do. Our world is full of these incredible carbon, retrieving machines. They suck CO2 out of the atmosphere, and the C part, the carbon part, goes into making the structure of the plant, so that the weight of most plants is about 50% carbon. So there's no magic to hempcrete storing carbon. All plants do it. The carbon is already stored. The plant, while it was growing, did that work. It took CO2 out of the atmosphere, made itself out of the carbon, and now the storage part is we're bundling it up and putting it in the building. If we just left it on the field, it would molder, it would decay, it would burn. In some way, that carbon would go back into the atmosphere. So we're not sequestering this carbon, we're removing it from the carbon cycle for a little while and sticking it in a building and figuring it'll stay there for 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, some amount of time. So it's great that this material, in all its forms, whether it's the bat insulation or the flooring or the hempcrete, all has that sort of inherent carbon storage in it. But we need to invest in actual life cycle analysis so that we can show the world that in actual numbers, not in like, hey, this is really groovy, it does this cool thing. You know, right now, there's the whole field called life cycle analysis, and they have standards and methodologies for figuring out, you know, how much carbon was emitted in putting the fertilizer on the field and disking the field and putting the seed in and then cutting it and then harvesting it and then processing it. And then there's a bunch of carbon in the material, and there's a net between how much was expended and how much is in the material. And those numbers are really important. And we need to be able to show the industry that our materials kick ass when it comes to carbon, but we need to be able to show them in actual verifiable data, not just in saying our materials kick ass. I think real information about cost, you know, I think we also have to own the fact that right now, hempcrete costs twice as much as any other insulation. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. Foam was twice as expensive as any other insulation when it hit the market too. And it took huge corporations, you know, a couple of decades to get that price down. So there's nothing to be embarrassed about saying, hey, we just invented this, we're really new at it, and it costs more. Of course it does. Everything that's new and just being invented costs more. So, you know, we don't need to try to like trick people into saying, oh no, it's really cheap, it's comparable to everything else. We can say, no, it costs a bit more right now. It does all these other great things. One of the great things it doesn't do is cost you less, because it can't right now. And also, you know, some real building science. It is true that hempcrete walls have this great ability to absorb and release moisture, as do basically all other plant-based, you know, wall materials or earth-based wall materials. All of these things have that same property. And again, if we want to just not make this like a cool factoid about hemp, if we want to make it like a selling point, then we need to figure out like how much moisture does it store, for how long, to what degree, you know, what effect does it have on the walls if they're really humid for a long time. All of those sorts of things, you know, are things that it would be good to sort of invest in the answers for, and that's starting to happen to some degree. Who is this? This is Hemp. So we heard about them earlier today. They have the beginnings of an environmental product declaration, and EPDs are the currency by which the building industry figures out what's a low carbon and a high carbon material. And there are some awesome free databases and softwares coming online, as well as paid softwares where you know, if somebody's looking for the material with the lowest carbon footprint or the lowest water use, or, you know, there's a whole bunch of other metrics in an environmental product declaration, these materials score really well, but if they're not in those databases, nobody finds them. If I'm an architect trying to specify a really low carbon insulation, if there's no EPD for hempcrete in the database I'm looking in, hempcrete's not on my map. So, you know, I think as IsoHemp has done here, it's really important to invest in those things. Also really important to make sure that people know, and again, in a verifiable way and in a searchable way, that these materials are really healthy. The folks up at Just Biofiber, they got a declare label on their blocks. So that's a great start. If I'm an architect now and my client has said, I want a really healthy red list chemical free building, and they go to the declare search, which is what a lot of architects do, suddenly, whoa, a hemp product shows up there. And I think, you know, the more that we can do that, I don't think there are any hemp products in Cradle to Cradle yet, or in the Health Product Declaration database. But these are the kinds of places that we need to show up. It's not like nobody in the building industry has thought about carbon storage or healthy materials or any of these things. There are actually like real legitimate ways that industry is recognizing these things. And if we want to be part of that, like we need to show up in these places where the industry is already sort of making these things available to practitioners. Also, and again, I feel like I'm repeating just things that other people said. Certifications for installers. This is going to be really critical if we do want people to use this. There's got to be more than 4 people in North America who know how to do it, and it's got to be reproducible. So figuring out how do we connect with college programs, how do we connect with apprenticeship models, how do we develop proper installation guides and things like that, so that people can sort of reproduce in a larger way than it has now. And then code compliance. Our code system in Canada is a little bit different than the U.S. code, and I love to point out the fact that the U.S. building code is called the International Building Code, as though it's the one that everybody uses, but really it's just the American one, and it's more or less a prescriptive code. It tells you sort of what you can do and prescribes solutions that are approvable. In Canada, we have a hybrid code. It's objective and it's prescriptive, and the objective part basically says the code is framed with 7 overarching objectives that are what the reason you have a building code is because we want buildings that do these 7 things. And if you were to read those objectives, you would think, wow, what a cool country Canada is, because like all of those objectives are things that me as a sustainable minded, ecologically friendly builder want to do. Doesn't mean that our code or our code officials are any more friendly to these things than yours, but the framing language is really good, and we're allowed to do something called alternative compliance packages. So that's basically if you want to do something that's not recognized in the code, you find all the references in the code that you think this material might interact with, and you basically show how what you're proposing meets the intent of the code in all of those things. So this thing on the right is like our sort of, we now have a standard hempcrete package, and I think it's really important that these things exist, that they're shareable, that people get to use them. So we give this to anybody who wants to do hempcrete in Canada. And you can see all those wonderful numbers, 9.10, 9.25, 5.3. Those are all the parts of the code that a wall system would interact with. And then this is like one of 8 or 10 pages of this document. I wasn't going to make you read the whole thing. But then we go on and basically, using code language, tell them, why it is that what we're doing works and why it meets all the intents of the code. And I think, again, in terms of, the sort of professionalization of all of this kind of stuff, there's been a lot of talk here about how resistant code officials are to something like hempcrete. And one of the best things that happened to me in my career was I met a guy named David Eisenberg, who's like my life hero. And he does a lot of code work for alternative building stuff. And I was getting in a lot of fights with building departments because I was younger and I was right, damn it, and they were wrong. And that's sort of how I approached those relationships. And he made it, really clear to me that these people in this role, their role is to protect public health and safety. And they take that very seriously, and they should. And we should be glad that they do that, because our cities don't burn down and kill thousands of people anymore, and earthquakes don't kill thousands of people, and that inclination to protect public health and safety has done a lot of really good things, and it's also created this big bureaucracy. But at heart, what I want is a safe, building for the people I'm going to design and build a building for, and the building official wants a safe building for those people too. And thinking about it in terms of, hey, we're allies in this, like we actually want the same things. When I started having those conversations, coming at it from that direction, like, let me show you not just like that I'm right. I'm not even going to tell you I'm right. I'm going to show you how much I care about the things that you care about, and how I'm actually going above and beyond the call of duty to do more than a conventional builder does, to do the things that you care about in your job. And that the relationship changes in a really great way. And also I learned how to speak their language, which is really helpful. All these 9.10s and 1 thises and all that kind of stuff. Before, if you go into a building department and you don't know this, it's like going into the French building department as an English speaker and trying to get a permit. It's like, of course they sort of shrug at you and don't know what to do with you. You need to be able to talk that language. And I think, if we do want to see these things make their way into the codes, we need to learn that language and be able to speak that language with them. And also, I think for the hemp building world, there's a really great model out there. The International Residential Code, your American Building Code, has a really thorough straw bale building appendix, a really thorough straw clay one, and it's about to get a cob one. Those communities did that. Like, there was no money behind it. There was no big association that pushed it. It was a group of people who figured out, how do we do this? How do we navigate this? And Marty Hammer in California and David Eisenberg and Bruce King and a bunch of people like that, they just put in the work. And now, in the US since 2015, if you want to build a straw bale building, the code language exists to support it. And that's a lot harder thing to do than say hempcrete. Hempcrete's, relatively simple in that way. And so, I think there's a really clear path to figuring out how that gets into the codes. And could happen quite quickly. And I think, the other thing is that, and this has also come up today, so I'm just repeating what other people say yet again, that our demo projects, the things that we're doing now as sort of like early adopters and early practitioners, they need to be good, for every one failure of a alternative type material, you basically decimate the next 100 really great examples. So, making sure that, we're not having those public failures, and that, we're creating really good, really good examples of these buildings, and not just really good, like, hey, check it out, doesn't it look really good? But really good because we've tested the performance of it. We did a blower door test. We know how airtight this building is. We've modeled, or we've followed the energy use of this building, and we've compared it to an energy model, and we know that it's performing really well, or maybe even better than we wanted it to do. We actually track the budget, and we can actually say, the hempcrete insulation of this building cost X, and so it becomes comparable to other things. So it's not just like make a nice building, it's verify it and make sure that, again, that the sort of like the data and the information is there to back it up. And then I think also there will be times, and I think especially, while the hemp industry is in its infancy, like it is, in this part of the world, that hemp is not the only answer if you want to make good buildings that are good for the environment, based on local materials, have all of these great attributes that we know that hemp has. There's all kinds of options for doing that. So when the sunflowers started showing up on the earlier presentation, I was like, oh, somebody beat me to the fact that you can make hempcrete out of sunflowers and it's just the same as hempcrete. But you can. If you don't have hemp where you live and you want to do a sort of hemp lime type building, go get some sunflower stalks from a local sunflower grower. When we started looking at sunflower stalks, when we chipped them up and held them next to hemp hurd, nobody can tell the difference between the two. They look the same, they weigh the same. When we mix it with the binder, the same thing comes out. We test them out, they have the same strength, they have the same R value. So sunflower stalks, Jerusalem artichoke stalks. When I was in South Carolina, somebody showed me okra. I think you could make hempcrete out of okra. So, I think hemp is a wonderful plant. There's all kinds of things we can do about it, but by God, it's not the only biomass with really cool properties that you can get your hands on. And this is where I think the criteria stuff it becomes really important. It's like, do you really want to like make a hemp, specifically a hemp building, or do you want to have a low carbon footprint? Do you want it to be healthy and non-toxic? Do you want it to be affordable? Do you want the materials to be local? If you want all of those things and hemp doesn't become the answer to those questions, something else will. And there's all kinds of really cool things. I don't know if anybody's looked at what Ecovative does with the mycelium, the mycofoam. We put it on a building we did recently. This is mushroom roots. So you take a chopped straw. In fact, sometimes Ecovative uses hemp as the growing medium, and they inoculate it with their spores. And when you get the material, you put a little bit of flour and water in it, and it grows into this awesome insulation. Best R value of any natural insulation, naturally fireproof, and it grows in situ. That's super cool. And all of these things, waste textiles, Rewall is shredded up drinking cartons pressed back together. It's a drywall replacement. Rice hulls, like in the billions of tons we have rice hulls every year that are the best simple like dry insulation from a plant material that you can get. They run through a cellulose dense packer really well, are 3.5 per inch, naturally fire resistant. So if there's rice near you but not hemp, do rice hulls. So anyway, there are all kinds of different materials out there. And also, if you are sort of feeling like hemp is the thing I want to do, you also have to think about all the other parts of the building that aren't going to be hemp. If you want to sort of maintain the integrity of that vision of whatever it happens to be, a low carbon building or a healthy building, because, I've seen some really unfortunate buildings where people have, done really great natural wall systems, but they've done it on like an 8-inch concrete slab sitting on 8 inches of styrofoam insulation with styrofoam going down the side and a spray foam roof. And it's like, everything about the rest of the stuff you did is completely the opposite of what you thought you were doing with your walls, and you've kind of like negated the whole point of it. So I think you have to think about those criteria and sort of carry them through the entire project. And when it comes to carbon footprint, I just did a master's degree. I spent 3 years calculating carbon numbers. How's that for boring thing to do? But it was super interesting, and I modeled all kinds of different wall systems that are feasible to build here, and all the ones in green have carbon storage. So if it's a negative number, that's how many kilograms of CO2 are stored in that wall material. And you can see hempcrete's up there, double stud wood frame with hempcrete. Maybe I can. So 13 tons of stored carbon. That's great, but a bare wood frame with wood fiber board on the outside is 12 tons. And wood framing with chopped straw in it is 23 tons. And, there's all kinds of things that you can do if carbon storing is what you want to do. There are lots and lots of options to be able to do that. And while I'm sort of riffing on the carbon thing, it's a really important thing that we all could do, because right now the way we build buildings, sorry, I'm speaking metric. I hope that's okay. But an average building in the study I did has about 225 kilograms of CO2 emitted for every square meter of area of a building. And that means that if you added up all the small residential buildings that get built in the US in a year, it's the equivalent emissions of 15 coal-fired power plants. So the residential building industry in this country, that's its level of emissions just from making the materials, not from operating the buildings, just making the materials. If we did them all in a really cool, doesn't matter if it's hemp or straw or wood fiber, or if we do it in some sort of carbon storing way, we can not emit those 15 coal plants worth of emissions, and we can further draw down the emissions of another 10 coal plants in those same buildings. That's a huge difference. In Ontario, we shut down 6 coal-fired power plants. It was the single biggest reduction of emissions in North America. And the small scale residential building industry has the ability to basically take 25 coal plants offline on an annual basis. So as far as collective action goes, there's hardly anything better we could do for the climate than to really think about how do we put plants in buildings, and it's not that hard to do. Oh yeah, here's a picture of hempcrete and sunflowercrete. There's no difference. The only difference for me is that I had to stop doing hempcrete for a few years because our only supplier, Plains Hemp in Manitoba, had an industrial accident and they were shut down for 2 years and there was no more hemp. And it was like, oh, that sucks. I really like doing hempcrete. And then I was cleaning up my own garden and I was chopping down the sunflowers and I looked at the thing I had just chopped and I was like, that looks like hemp in the middle. And so I gathered up those stalks and I ran them through a chipper. And the nice thing about the sunflower stalks is there's no fiber to deal with. So as a small scale farmer or builder or anybody working with this material, I don't need a decorticator. I can just take stalks, chip them, and build with them. And I'm not saying that sunflowercrete is better than hempcrete. I'm just saying it's one of lots and lots of different plant-based things that we can build with and work with. So look around. What's local to you, especially if helping your local economy and keeping your financial resources in your local economy. If all of that stuff is important to you, find who's growing what around you and figure out how you might be able to build with that, rather than getting stuck on something that you may end up importing from Europe because you like the sound of it. So yeah, I think we have something really great. We being people interested in this stuff, we being hemp builders or straw builders or dirt builders or whoever, that we have this like really great offering, which is all of those things: healthy buildings, locally sourced buildings, affordable buildings, high performance buildings, like the CO2 storage potential. All of this is stuff that like we've got on a plate and we're like handing it out. And we really want people to be able to access this. And I think all of those things I was talking about, the sort of quantifying it, making sure it's showing up in databases, making sure we've got our numbers right, making sure we know how to do and talk codes, like all of that is what sort of like really puts the plate out there instead of like over here where only we know about it. And I think I was so glad that you two talked about the sort of indigenous situation and the sort of looking at what was here before us, and just there's the whole thing that we're talking about in the building world. Everything that everybody up on the stage has been talking about it's a revolution in how we think about these things. Like the fact that we can think about a building that's good for us instead of bad for us, that's revolutionary. A building that is grown locally instead of imported from far away is revolutionary. A building that can put carbon in it instead of being responsible for emissions. These things are like crazy, radical, cool, awesome things. And if we're going to make this crazy, radical, cool, awesome move in this great direction, there's more we can do. There's more we can do around who do we invite to this party. How do we make sure that this isn't just a bunch of privileged white people doing something that's really good for them and like a little back pat and stuff, but how do we make sure that there's youth involved, that there's people of color involved, that there's indigenous people involved, and those are conscious decisions that we make. If you're doing this cool new hemp startup, make sure there's an under 20-year-old indigenous person on your board, or like those kinds of things are really important. If you're doing the build, like who's on site. We love these crews that we put together of like Maya, who's a 21-year-old woman of Indian descent, and Diedrich, who's a 62-year-old guy from Holland, and like when you have a crew like that, when the people who do things come from that sort of diversity of background, so much more happens than just a building gets built. Like communities get built, understanding gets built, All kinds of wonderful things sort of pop out of that mixture of ages and backgrounds and races and things like that. Thinking about how do we actually work with farmers, and I was really glad to see a panel here where seed producers and machinery producers and all those people, because like that's the pirate ship thing. Like we're a team, and it's not like team builder is on one boat and team designers is on another boat, and we're team producer is on another boat, and we're sort of like racing around somehow. It's like we're all on the same boat, so like let's recognize that. And is there a way that just like CSA systems, community shared agriculture, where a bunch of people give the farmer some money up front in order for a share of the things. If you want to build a hemp building, find a hemp farmer and give them some money now, and they'll give you some hemp later. Like there's all kinds of more cooperative ways that we could approach, how we do that. If you want wood for your building, find somebody who's got trees and a sawmill and, work out a deal. You don't have to go to Home Depot and buy the wood that way. So where does the energy come from to make your building? Like, are you building it out in the boonies and you're going to run a generator for 2 months while you build the building? I ran the numbers on that. You will emit more carbon from your generator than you store in your awesome hempcrete walls. So if you're not going to build with renewable energy, you've kind of like kicked the feet out from your own argument about making a carbon storing building. How much waste are you going to produce? Are you going to think about all the different materials that are coming on your site, and where is all of this stuff going to go? What happens to your offcuts? One of my all-time favorite pictures is the bottom picture. That's June, a 56-year-old retired school teacher who came and worked for us. She was our waste manager for that year. We built an entire 1,200 square foot residential building, and she's holding the landfill waste from that project. 18 pounds fit in 2 bags from an entire building project. The norm in Canada is 8,000 pounds of waste from a building of that size. So, there's so much to consider, so many ways that we know how to do really, really well, and can kind of like be on your mental radar as you think about this. It's like we get so into like the building, that whether it's a rectangle or a square or a dome or whatever it is, like all of our attention is like in there, that we forget about the people and the farmer and the sawyer and the waste and the energy source and all of that kind of stuff. And so I'd really encourage you to keep it broad, keep that sort of the goals you have for the building should just be the goals for everything you're doing. So I'm just about wrapped up here, and what I want to do is give you, might be uncomfortable, I don't know, but like a minute or two to think, okay, so here we are at this first hemp building summit, and all kinds of cool ideas are flying around, and everybody's like buzzing with excitement, and there's so many things we could do, and so much work there has to be to get done, and all that kind of stuff. So just sit for a minute, close your eyes if you want to close your eyes, and think about, okay, so it's 2025, 5 years from now, we've all ended up back here or at some version of a gathering like this. What's happened? Like, what are the things, 5 years from now, who will you be? What will you have done? What will have been the changes? How will like all of these goals that we're carrying around in this, how will they have actually manifested? And just think about it for a minute. And hopefully it's exciting, because the possibility for all kinds of change is there. So I will be quiet and we can all think about that for a second. A quiet minute in a crowded room seems to take a long time, eh? All right, thank you for indulging me in that. I hope it was interesting in your mind. So I have been working with some really dear colleagues for quite a while now, and we thought about, okay, we always put together these slideshows, and we always have all these points that we want to make, but what if we had to just boil it all down. What are we actually saying? And I don't know if this is the definitive list, but this is how it stands now. And I'm not going to read them all for you. You can read them. Some of these might overlap with your own thoughts and goals. Some of them might be in a different order than you might have put them in. There might be some that don't show up here that you think are important, but this is sort of the intent that we're trying to carry around with us in our work. I love the last one. Okay, so that's what I have for you. Like Maddie mentioned, I did a hempcrete book. I have 2 with me, which isn't really enough, but books are heavy things to carry around on airplanes. So, but if you want to find it, the carbon work I did, the master's thesis, it's available online on various like ResearchGate and things like that, and also at our website. And that's my email if you want to reach out. And I think there's probably some time for questions, or no, we're done. Okay. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to talking to you individually out there.